Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our Qualified Residential Treatment Program, or QRTP, assessment process and qualified individual requirements. My name is Ashley Solzrud-Beckman, and I am with the Child Safety and Permanency Division at the Department of Human Services. And this is our third webinar in a series of webinars on the Family First Prevention Services Act implementation for the state of Minnesota. I am going to be kicking things off today, and we're going to have a number of presenters talking today about these specific requirements. And Eric, if you could move to the next slide, please. So just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, you will not be able to unmute yourself due to how we have this presentation set up. So please post your questions into the Q&A section in Zoom. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, you will see on the bottom of your screen, if you move your mouse over your screen, it'll pop up a bar at the bottom that says participants, Q&A, chat, and you're going to post your questions into the Q&A. That's going to be the best way for us to be able to put all of the questions together when we review them at the end of our webinar. Slides for this webinar are going to be available online afterwards, and the presentation is currently being recorded. You probably got a notification when you logged in. It's being recorded, and it's going to be available for future viewing on the Child Welfare Training Academy webpage. Next slide, please. So presenters, myself, Ashley Solzrud-Beckman, and then Tendai Waitak, who is also in Child Safety and Permanency. She's well-being. She's a program representative. And Deb Besky-Brown is our foster care unit supervisor. And then Eric Kratt, who talked a little bit earlier with the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy. He will also be presenting, and he has put some links to the tutorial and the presentation in the chat. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our agenda today is we're going to give a very brief recap of our last two presentations. One was an overview on the Family First Prevention Services Act and the implementation plan for Minnesota. And then the next one was the Juvenile Treatment Screening Team webinar. We're just going to give brief recaps to kind of set the stage for today. Then we will go into talking about the Qualified Residential Treatment Programs, what those are, and then talk a bit about the assessment that is required in order to enter into the Qualified Residential Treatment Program. Then we're going to talk about the qualified individual who completes the assessment. And then finally, the county and tribal agencies' responsibilities, as well as the qualified individual's roles, responsibilities, and how you're going to document all of this in SSIS, as well as how the qualified individual will do their documentation. We're going to leave time at the end for questions. Please pose your questions as we go through the webinar, however, like I said, in the Q&A section, and we will tabulate those and kind of put them in order for the end of the slide. Yes, thank you. Right there on the Q&A, you click that Q&A button to put your questions in. And you can go to the next slide, Eric. So as I mentioned before, the overview webinar and the Juvenile Treatment Screening Team webinars are both available online so that you can view them if you weren't able to attend those webinars in person, or if you just want to review it again. I know we have presented a lot of information, and this is a pretty complicated topic, so please feel free to access those resources after this training to review those webinars in full. And Eric said that we will post links at the end of the webinar so that you can have access to those files right away. And then with that, I believe I am going to turn things over to Tendai Waitak, who's going to get us started on talking about our topics today.
All right, thanks, Ashley. Hello, everyone. My name is Tendai Waitak. I work in the foster care unit at DHS. Like Ashley just mentioned, I'll be walking us through today on the new Qrtp assessment process, including the responsibilities of the qualified individual who completes this assessment, and also the responsibilities of county tribal agencies in regards to the Qrtp assessment. And like Ashley mentioned, this is all new information due to the new Ffpsa requirements. So everything we're going to talk through today is nothing that has been done before. So we'll go through that together here. Please make sure you post your questions if you have any for today's webinar and moving forward. Next slide. So I wanted to start off with just kind of talking about Qrtp certification requirements. So in order for any children's residential facilities to be considered a Qrtp that serves children with serious emotional behavioral disorders or disturbances, Ffpsa has defined the standards for these Qrtp to be, they need to be use trauma-informed model, have a registered or licensed nursing staff or other clinical staff available 24/7, facilitate family members, including siblings, participation and outreach, document how family members are integrated into the child's treatment process, provide discharge planning and aftercare supports for at least 6 months after the child has been discharged from that facility. And lastly, they need to be accredited and certified by DHS as a Qrtp program. So just want to make sure we went through what those certifications are so we all understand. So the Qrtp is actually a certification status that all the children residential facilities need to get to be considered as a Qrtp. So the existing children residential treatments, group homes and foster care residents, commonly known as corporate foster homes, will be required to become certified as a Qrtp. Let's see here. Next slide. So next slide here just talks about the Qrtp placement requirements. So for the responsible social service agency to place a child in a Qrtp and for that child to continue this placement, being in that placement, there's certain requirements that need to be met and followed. The first one being what we're going to talk about today, which would be the Qrtp assessment completed by the qualified individual. And this assessment is really done by the qualified individual to determine whether it is necessary and appropriate to place that child in that Qrtp. Like I said, we'll get into more detail about that here in a little bit. The next placement requirement is assembling a family and permanency team. And this team will provide input into the Qrtp assessment and ongoing case planning for the child. An out-of-home placement plan will need to be updated after the assessment is done. Court approval of the child's placement in a Qrtp will also need to be met, including ongoing reviews and permanency hearings. Court review and any extended placement of the child in a Qrtp is also one of the requirements. And all this information is all new in statute, and I'll provide that link as well when we are done here so you have it. So please note the requirements in the bullet 2 to 5. So family and permanency downward to ongoing reviews and permanency hearings. These will be discussed in detail in upcoming webinars in this summer. So we're not going to go into much detail with that because that's going to be talked about sometime this summer in the webinars we are having. Next slide. All right, so the agency process for considering and placing a child in a Qrtp assessment includes a juvenile treatment screening team conducting a screening and recommending placement in a Qrtp for a child to receive services. However, a child may be placed in a Qrtp due to a mental health emergency or crisis, and in this case, the juvenile treatment screening team can be bypassed. Also, a juvenile treatment screening team is not required to be convened when considering placements in programs other than those accredited and certified as Qrtps. And these programs, and we've talked about these programs in our 2 previous webinars, are for specialized settings for pregnant and parenting youth who have been or are at risk for sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation, or supervised independent living for youth age 18 to 21. So Qrtp assessment is not required for those settings. Next slide. Right. And we just wanted to put on a nice visual here for so we can all see what the Qrtp placement process timeline really looks like from start to finish. Finish being 6 months after a child is discharged from a Qrtp. So there's just a visual of that for you to have. So it's really just saying here that if a child enters the Qrtp, if the following conditions are not met, then the federal reimbursement ends after 14 days. So an assessment by the qualified individual within 30 days, court review of the assessment, Qrtp placement decision within 60 days, and subsequent extended placement court review, including just the discharge planning and identified family-based aftercare services during the 6 months after discharge. And just a quick note here, in order to avoid moving a child too many times from one placement to the next, the Qrtp assessment needs to be done prior to a placement in a Qrtp. If a child needs to be placed in a Qrtp immediately due to a crisis, the assessment can be done whilst the child is in that Qrtp placement. And that this assessment also needs to be completed within the 30-day time frame. So really the time frame to complete the assessment, whether the child is already in a Qrtp or is not there yet, is 30 days from the time of referral. Next slide. All right. Now we're going to just walk through information about the Qrtp assessment. Next slide. And so the purpose of the new Qrtp assessment is to have an objective and independent review of a child's needs and strengths, including family and community resources. And this is to determine if placement in a Qrtp is the most effective and appropriate level of care to meet the child's needs in a least restrictive environment possible. So the QI is really just determining if the child's needs can be met within the family's home or a family foster home with community services, rather than being placed in a Qrtp. This assessment will be done in conjunction with what we call the Family and Permanency team, which will be assembled by the responsible social service agency. I'll get a little bit into this a little bit later in our presentation today. Thank you. So as part of the Qrtp assessment, the qualified individual will assess the child's needs and strengths using the validated functional assessment tool. The department has chosen the Minnesota Child and Adolescent Strengths and Needs Assessment, for short CANS, for this purpose. And we'll talk a little bit more about the CANS in the next slide. But as I mentioned earlier, the QI will be determining whether child's needs can be met with the family or placement in a foster home. And if not, which setting will provide the most appropriate level of care in the least restrictive environment. And this setting would need to be consistent also with the child's permanency goals. The QI will also, qualified individual will also be responsible for developing specific short and long-term mental health and behavioral health goals And they're going to use all the information that they're going to gather during the interview process with the child, parents, and the family and permanency team. The goal for the QI is then to determine, after all the conversations they've had with the child, family and permanency team, the reasons why the child needs cannot be met by the family or in a foster family home. Something to note here, a reason for a child to not be placed in a foster home cannot be because there is shortage of family foster homes. So that would not be an acceptable reason. Another thing that the QI is to determine with this assessment is why the recommended placement in a QRTP is the setting that will provide the child with the most effective and appropriate level of care in the least restrictive environment. And you're going to hear that statement a lot, because that's really what this assessment is meant to do, to make sure that the child, only the children who need to be in a QRTP or a residential facility are the ones that actually go there, and the ones who can get service and supports with their families or in a family foster home stays in those types of settings. And the qualified individual will also need to determine how the placement is consistent with the child's short and long-term goals that are specified within the permanency plan, as I mentioned earlier. So this is really, in a nutshell, what the QRTP assessment is and what the qualified individual will be required to do. Next slide. Thank you. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the functional tool that the qualified individual is going to be using. And like I mentioned, this is the Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths, for short, CANS. And this tool was actually developed by the Parade Foundation. You can find them online if you want to Google them. So this tool is what the QI will be completing in order to inform the assessment process. So the QI interviews the child, parents. They will consult with the family and permanency team and a tribal representative to gather all pertinent information. And then the QI will complete the CANS at the end of what is considered a discovery or assessment process in order to organize the information they collected. So the CANS will ultimately reflect consensus from the whole group, the child, the family and permanency, including a tribal representative. As you can see on the slide here, the CANS is set up of broad categories or domains with specific questions that may prompt a deeper assessment into each specific individualized assessment, depending upon the needs of the child. But the main domains up here that we have contained in the tool are the strengths domain. So I'll just give quick examples. So this will have things like family strengths, natural supports, community life, behavioral emotional needs domain. So this talks about depression, anxiety, anger control, trauma, the life functioning domain. Examples of what's included in that domain is family functioning, what is the living situation, what is the child's social functioning, recreation, school. The risk domain is really talking about suicide risk, non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, danger to others, sexual aggression, running away, fire setting. So you would have all the questions that would need to be answered for each of those things. The behavioral emotional needs domain, this part talks about psychosis, impulsivity, hyperactivity, attention. The cultural factors domain really is talking about language, traditions, cultural rituals, cultural stress, cultural congruence. And as part of this process, there will be a reference guide that our qualified individuals will be able to get all the definitions of all these examples I'm giving, so that it's just clear on what they're being asked to complete as far as the CANS is concerned. I just want to make sure I put it out there, and that will be available on our website soon, that reference guide for the CANS. The last domain here is caregiver resources and needs. So the qualified individual will also need to rate the caregiver in the household. So they're talking about supervision, what is their involvement with care, do they have social resources, residential stability, mental health safety, and all of that. The tool also contains adverse childhood experiences. So those would need to be identified as well in the tool by the qualified individual. So the CANS ultimately is going to help the qualified individual understand and determine the areas where a child and parents need support, and where there is strengths, by using a rating system that will then determine if a child should be placed in a QRTP or not. Just to make something clear here, the CANS is not a diagnostic tool, and it will not make the final recommendation for a placement that the child should be in. The CANS recommendation may be overridden by the qualified individual if the qualified individual believes the child needs can be met in their home or family foster home or any other of the specialized setting we talked about. So ultimately, the QI, as the qualified individual, has the final say on what the recommendation will be. Our qualified individuals are going to be provided training on this tool, including the role and the responsibilities for completing this assessment. And so this will be done before they can assume this role. So I just want to make sure that as we are introducing all these new things, we're going to have a training that is going to train all our qualified individuals so they're ready to go when they get referrals. Some things just to mention about the CANS: most states are using the CANS for the purpose of the Qrtp assessment and placement decision as well. So we're not the only ones who are using this tool for the purpose of the Qrtp assessment. Next slide. All right, now we're going to have Deborah Besky-Brown walk us through the qualified individual information. Deb?
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to talk about the qualified individual and the assessment that they complete prior to or within 30 days of placement in a QRTP. So let's go to the next slide. For placement in a QRTP, Family First requires an objective and independent assessment by a qualified individual. A qualified individual may be a licensed clinician or may be a community member who becomes a trained professional by attending the qualified individual training that is going to be offered by the Child Welfare Training Academy. Both the licensed clinician and the community member must complete that training in order to be a qualified individual in the state of Minnesota. The reason for that is the training provides information about the role of the qualified individual, as well as a certification on the CANS that Tendai just went through, the valid assessment tool that must be used. To note that when ICWA applies to a case, the county must contact the tribe so they can designate the qualified individual who is a culturally competent professional or licensed clinician for that case. At the point of the assessment, the qualified individual will complete the assessment in a manner appropriate to the child's and the family's culture. There are several points that we want to make regarding that, and that the qualified individual is going to get this information as part of the training. Qualified individuals are to practice cultural humility, recognize their own biases and remain non-judgmental, conduct the assessment with the knowledge that the child receiving child welfare services has experienced trauma, and to be sensitive to the child's specific trauma-related behaviors and responses when they are interviewing or having conversations about the child with the family and permanency team. Going on. So this is a list of qualified individuals, or who could be qualified individuals. keeping in mind that this list is not all inclusive. It could offer other people as well. But this is the list we have at this point in time. Going on. I will just add to this slide that everyone who is identified as being a qualified individual will need to complete the training that will be offered by the Training Academy. Going on to the next slide. At this time, a qualified individual cannot be anyone providing child welfare services as an employee of an agency, of a social service agency. So this would include children's mental health and developmental disabilities case managers who work for the county social service agency, or individuals who are employed at tribal social service agencies that offer child welfare services. Also, it's required that individuals aren't affiliated with any placement setting in which the responsible social service agency has placed children. So that may include foster parents or residential setting employees, or other types of agencies that we work with that manages or would have part in the responsibility of developing or licensing placement settings. Going on. So there has been a waiver that's requested, and to have employees who are either affiliated with placing settings or affiliated with county or tribal social service agencies, we have to have a federally approved waiver. A waiver has been submitted by the department, or will be submitted by the department as part of our Title 40 state plan for county employees to be considered qualified individuals. When the department receives a response on that waiver request, we will provide that information of what has been approved and what the provisions are regarding that waiver. Going on. The department will be seeking individuals with special knowledge of and lived experience within the African American, American Indian, and communities of color, and we will be recruiting qualified individuals for the department. At the same time, we are looking at county and tribal agencies to develop their own qualified individual programs to move forward in a parallel process to develop their own qualified individual programs at the local level. Whether the qualified individuals are recruited by the department or whether they've been recruited by a county or tribal program, all the recruited qualified individuals must attend the 2-day training that is provided by the child welfare training system. Our qualified individuals will be trained on the roles and responsibilities of the qualified individual and include being certified to administer the CANS tool. The department will maintain and make available a list of all qualified individuals that have been trained and certified by the department, whether that is individuals who have been referred to us by local, county, and tribal social service agencies, or whether they're individuals that the department has contracted with for that role. The contracted qualified individuals by the department should be used when either the county's qualified individuals are not available or to meet specific cultural needs of the child requiring the assessment. And keeping in mind that the family may request a specific qualified individual to serve that need. And more information will become available on the department's program as well as the training program in the next couple of months. We hope to have, or we plan to have, some qualified individuals trained and ready by October 1. I also want to add, though, that this will be a work in progress by the department, and we will continue to be adding qualified individuals to our program, as well as to continue to offer the qualified individual program as the need arises. Moving on. I am now going to pass it back to Tendai for further information about county agencies and initiative tribes' responsibilities.
All right, thank you, Deb. So now we just want to walk through what the responsibilities will be for our county and initiative tribe, what the responsibilities would be as far as the Qrtp assessment is concerned. So when the juvenile treatment screening team recommends that a child be placed in a Qrtp, the agency will be responsible for making a referral of the Qrtp assessment to a qualified individual as soon as possible. So the following are just some consideration when making this referral to a qualified individual. So the agency will need to consult with the child's family, if the child is 14 years or over, or is appropriate to select the qualified individual. That way, the family and child are involved in a sense, picking who is going to work with them to complete the assessment. The child or the child's parents, when appropriate, may request that a specific culturally competent qualified individual complete the child's assessment. So the agency should make efforts to refer this assessment to that identified qualified individual. A little note on that is that while it is important for a specific or preferred qualified individual to complete the assessment must not be delayed for that purpose. So we need to make sure that to make the efforts, but make sure we are not then, in a sense, running late in getting the assessment done. Another referral consideration is that the QI may be determined also based on the child's treatment needs at that time. So whether immediate action is needed for that child, and what other different treatment needs that the child might have at that point. Another consideration when making a referral is the child's cultural needs as well. And also in talking about when the Indian Child Welfare Act applies to a child, the county the agency must contact the child's tribe without delay to give the tribe the option to designate a qualified individual who is a trained, culturally competent professional or a licensed clinician. And this piece about ICWA is definitely in the new statute and policy. Part of what will be required as well as a referral is if the level of care determination was conducted for the child during the process of the juvenile treatment screening team, this must be also provided to the qualified individual. Next slide. All right, so to initiate this the Qrtp assessment referral, the agency caseworker will now complete the assessment referral form located under participant document nodes in Ssis to document this referral to the qualified individual. So we're going to switch here and have Eric kind of walk us through this referral form in Ssis.
All right, everybody. So I've broken the screen up into a few different screenshots here. To create a new document, you are going to create it under person documents. So it's going to be under the participant node. You're going to create that action menu and select new document. And then you're going to be required to select a document template next to this magnifying glass. Not the greatest screenshot here I'm seeing, but after you search for the documents, you should either be able to select in the tree view the Qrtp Assessments Referral Form, or from the grid Qrtp Assessment Referral. Then in normal SSIS functionality, you will be brought to the setup tab of that document, and you'll note that 8 required fields need to be completed. The document template, the description, autofill based on the document that you've selected, and then the status will always default to draft until you've completed the editing of your Qrtp assessment referral, and then you can change that to finalized. Once you change that to finalized, a finalized date will appear in this field. Then we have the document portion. We have Qrtp assessment referral form that's going to replicate what is up here in the description. And then we have our elements section where you are going to be required to choose the letter date. Under the agency portion of the setup tab, that should default to the agency database information where this document is being created. This was created in a test environment, so that's what you will see under the screenshot. But you will see your agency name when you're creating it. Continuing on with that setup tab, we have the participant information that autofills based on the person that you're filling out this document under. We have the placements or locations or absences section, which will autofill with the placement information should it be entered. If it's not entered yet, then it will not appear under this portion of the document setup tab. And then workers will answer the following question here. Is the current placement setting a qualified residential treatment program placement? The dropdown will have you select either yes or no. The following fields on the setup tab include information for Indian custodians, legal guardians, or parents. I've collapsed all of these fields just so that I can condense it into one screenshot, but this particular screenshot within a screenshot shows you that these individuals will appear on the setup tab based on the relationship information that you've pre-entered into SSIS. So you want to make sure that relationships are entered for these individuals on the relationship screen in order to draw them into the setup tab of this document. Then you'll want to select whether or not you want to display the language block. And then the following fields are noted as required as well. So you're going to include your caseworker email, the caseworker's full name, the caseworker's phone number, followed by the qualified individual fields for qualified individual email, qualified individual's full name, and then finally phone. The information that you enter on the setup tab will merge into the document itself. So this following slide is just an illustration of the document in edit mode, and it's broken up into 2 different sections so that I could fit it onto one slide. This screenshot over here on the left-hand side shows you all of the information that has merged into the document based on the information that you put onto the setup tab. You'll want to enter the credentials of your qualified individual here. To pull the date for the referral date, you'll click on this MMDDYYYY and select the date that you're referring. Double check to make sure that the information has merged into the document. And then you'll answer a series of questions as to whether ICWA and MIFPA apply. Is the child at risk or a victim of sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation? Was the level of care determination conducted for the child? You'll want to select yes or no. And then if yes, you'll share this information with the qualified individual. The following section of the document will have you select when the assessment is due. Again, you want to double check and make sure that information has merged properly into the document. You want to include any permanency planning that has already been conducted and make an appropriate selection in the corresponding checkbox. And then the placing agency information based on what you've entered on the setup tab will merge into the document on the bottom portion of this document template. And then you're going to send a list of family and permanency team members with this referral form as well. And we'll be going over that in the family and permanency team in a separate webinar. So I'm going to hand it back over to Tendai to talk to you about the authorization to release information.
All right, thank you, Eric. Yeah, so this piece talks about just data sharing with a qualified individual. So this is just a continuation of the responsibilities that we're talking about. That we need our county agencies, initiative tribes to remember. So obtaining all necessary releases of information from the parents, custodians, guardians for the qualified individual to start this process with the child and with the family and permanency team. As they will be discussing case-specific information with the agency. These releases may also be for collaboration purposes if the qualified individual needs to review any pertinent documents like the IEPs. And remember, qualified individuals' review of any of this pertinent documents, if needed, is not required for them to make their final recommendation. But if they need to review them for any purposes, they need to be able to have signed releases for them. Right. Next slide. All right, the next responsibility for the county and tribal agencies is to assemble the family and permanency team. And I mentioned this earlier, and we won't go too much into detail, but I'll just introduce it a little bit here. So after the juvenile treatment screening team recommends placing a child in a QRTP, the agency will assemble the family and permanency team within 10 days of receiving this recommendation from the juvenile treatment screening team. So agencies will need to engage and consult with the child and the child's parents, the tribe, to determine appropriate family and permanency team members. So this family and permanency team will be providing input to the qualified individual's Qrtp assessment of the child. They will also provide support for the child and support for the parent in getting what they need while the child is either at home or in a QRTP. So some examples of who these members are going to be as part of the family and permanency team. So this can be any other biological family members, obviously the parents, legal guardians or custodians, foster care providers, if that's applicable for that child, any other relatives, appropriate professionals who are a resource to the child's family. So this includes like teachers, medical providers, mental health provider. And for a child who is 14 or older, this can be a person selected by the child. Or for an Indian child, the child's tribal representative. So this list is not quite exhaustive, but those are the main people who need to be part of the family and permanency team. So more detailed information about the family and permanency team role in a QRTP placement will actually be provided in a webinar that's going to be on September 2nd from 1 to 2 p.m. So for more detailed information, please register for that so you can get provided all this other information that will be pertinent for the QRTP assessment. All right, next slide. Thank you. So another responsibility that the agency will have would be engaging with the selected qualified individual throughout the QRTP assessment process. Like we said, the assessment needs to be done within 30 days. We can't really give a timeline on how fast each specific qualified individual will complete it, but it definitely needs to be done within 30 days time frame. So engagement with the qualified individual will be very, very important. So the qualified individual will communicate and consult with the agency caseworker, since the worker knows much more information about the child. And this consultation may include making the qualified individual aware of the agency's efforts to prevent placement, keeping in mind that the assessment is to be independent of the agency's determination. This consultation can also include talking through with the QI, the short and long-term permanency plans for the child, how those were determined, as the QI will need to know this information for their documentation and process. This consultation as well can include assisting the qualified individual with contacting the family and permanency members. And this is only if it's needed. Otherwise, we're really going to be training our qualified individuals to do this engagement with the family and permanency teams by themselves. So unless there's an issue or they're not able to get a hold of anybody or they just need help in general, they'll be consulting and engaging with the agency worker. This consultation between the qualified individual and the agency worker can happen over the phone. Can also include discussing progress of the assessment. And I think this would help with making sure that our qualified individuals are kind of keeping in time with the timelines for completing the assessment. So being quick with your responses will be very vital to this engagement. All right, and lastly about engagement here, the qualified individual is going to be encouraged to discuss their final recommendation with the agency prior to submitting their the document for the assessment, just so everybody's on the same page and you understand kind of what you're going to be getting. So there will be that engagement there. And like I said, in our training, we'll make sure that our qualified individual understands that that process needs to happen as well. Next slide. So it's going to be very important to remember that if a qualified individual is to do an in-person interview or meeting with a child as part of the Qrtp assessment, supervision will be required for this in-person interview or meeting. And this may be provided by the agency caseworker. And this supervision is really for the best interest of the child, and in order to reduce trauma and just to ensure that the child is safe and their well-being is taken care of. So that process would need to be, this is where the engagement comes into play when with the qualified individual to make sure that this is being determined if the qualified individual is going to do an in-person interview or meeting with a child. Next slide. And this is another responsibility for our agencies, is just to follow up with the qualified individual recommendations. So after the qualified individual completes the assessment and determines that the child's family or family foster home or any other less restrictive placement other than a Qrtp, so that's the pregnant and parenting youth, setting for youth who have been at risk or are at risk for sex trafficking or commercial sex exploitation, or the supervised independent facility for ages 18 to 21. The agency will be responsible for following up with the recommendation. So in this instance, when the qualified individual recommends family foster home, or any of the other less restrictive settings, the agency will have to, so if a child was already placed in a Qrtp before the assessment was completed, and this would happen, like we talked about earlier, due to an emotional crisis or mental health emergency, the agency must move the child out of that Qrtp and transition the child to the less restrictive setting recommended within 30 days of the termination. So this only happens if the child was already placed in a Qrtp and the assessment was done after the fact. The agency also will need to make a plan for the child's determined placement, including making all the referrals to the recommended services and supports of the determined placement setting. And then they can also, the agency can also provide the assessment to the parent or legal guardians and guardian ad litem. So if the QI recommends placing a child in a Qrtp assessment, so the agency with the placement authority will make a referral to the appropriate Qrtp, and upon acceptance into that program, place the child in an approved and certified Qrtp program. So if the child was already placed in a Qrtp due to a mental health emergency, and the qualified individual recommends for that child to remain in that Qrtp, then there's no referral that needs to be made there unless there's another Qrtp that meet that child's needs. If the QI recommends placing a child in a Qrtp, agency may distribute that assessment as well to the child's parents or legal guardian and file the assessment with the court. The child's assessment and recommendation document that the qualified individual will complete then becomes a part of the child's out-of-home placement plan. Like I said, we're going to have a webinar about this information, how that is, this recommendation is part of the child's out-of-home placement. So we'll have a webinar about that. So just a quick note, the agency must not share the child's private medical data with the family and permanency team unless Chapter 13 permits the agency to disclose this data to the family and permanency team, or the child's parents has authorized the agency to disclose the child's private data and family and permanency team. So court review, when the qualified individual's recommendation is the placement in a Qrtp and the agency places the child in a Qrtp, the agency will have to obtain a court order at the next required hearing from a district court or tribal court from an initiative tribe within 60 days of placing that child there, finding that the child's needs placement in a Qrtp is appropriate and meets the child's individual needs. The courts will either approve or disapprove of this placement. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll not be going through this, this information because more detailed information is to come about the specific court review of the Qrtp, and that's going to be on September 9th from 1 to 2 p.m. So please register for that. All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit here about the qualified individual role and responsibility. Thank you. So when a referral is made to a qualified individual, they will be responsible as well as much as our agencies are. They also will be responsible for reviewing the referral with the agency caseworker in order to get anything clarified so they can be able to start their work. The QI will be required to complete the assessment within 30 days. Like I said before, we're going to make sure that we reiterate this in our training of the qualified individuals. So whether the referral was made prior to placement or after placement in a Qrtp due to an emergency or crisis. Next slide. Okay. The qualified individual will be responsible for engaging with the referring county or initiative tribe. So like I mentioned earlier, communication is going to be very important between the qualified individual and the caseworker throughout the assessment process. The qualified individual will need to consult with the caseworker on the child's short and long-term goals, as they will need to document this information. The qualified individual can request any additional information as needed from the agency. So this is kind of exactly what we talked about. That will be engagement of the caseworker to the QI. It's kind of in reverse of that the qualified individual needs to do the same, so everybody is on the same page. And that's including qualified individual asking the caseworker to assist with contacting the family and permanency team as needed if they need help. This also communicate, this consultation will also communicate with the caseworker if any concerns arise during the engagement of the QI with the members of the family and permanency team. So that way they'll be able to kind of let the worker know kind of this is what's happening. I had a conversation with this person, it didn't go well, or whatever needs to be provided or communicated to the caseworker about what happened with that team. The qualified individual will be encouraged to discuss the final recommendation with the agency, as we talked about prior to submitting the assessment document. And just a quick note, despite the qualified individual's engagement and consultation with the agency, this assessment determination still needs to be an independent assessment. So the final recommendation, despite the consultations and everything, really lies solely up to the qualified individual. Next slide. Qualified individual engagement with the child, parent, and family and permanency team. So to conduct this assessment, the qualified individual will be responsible for engaging and interviewing the child, the parents, guardians, custodians, the family and permanency team members. Their input and perspective from the adults who best know the child's needs will be valuable in order to determine what is the most appropriate and least restrictive environment that will meet this particular child's needs. So part of the QI's engagement with the family and permanency team, child, or tribe will be to identify what their placement preferences are for the child will be. It's just one of the things that they will do as part of that engagement. The qualified individuals will do interviews in person, by phone or virtually, and it will be put into take into consideration the family's communication preferences and obviously age of the child in order to determine how those interviews and meetings will happen with the child or family and permanency. And if requested by the qualified individual, the agency caseworker may assist the qualified individual in setting up some of these interviews as well. And this is just if the qualified individual needs some help with that. As I mentioned earlier, in-person interviews, meetings with the child by the qualified individual will need to be supervised for the well-being and safety of the child. Next slide. So this part talks about the Qrtp assessment documentation. So like we mentioned earlier, after the qualified individual has completed their assessment process, they would need to document their findings on a document that has been approved by the department. So this occurs after the QI completes the interviews, has completed the functional tool. So this documentation will include engagement with the child, parents, family, and permanency team, results of the CANs, and the qualified individual's final recommendation for that child. And some of the documentation that's going to be required for the qualified individual is to detail the reasons the child's needs cannot be met by the child, family, or in a family foster home. And this only, will be completed if the qualified individual is recommending for that child to be placed outside of the home and outside of a family foster home. And another part of what this documentation will require is why, if they're recommending a Qrtp placement, they'll need to provide reasons why that Qrtp will be the most effective and appropriate level of care to meet the child's needs. And how placing the child in that Qrtp is consistent with their short-term and long-term goals. So this is why it will be important to have that communication and consultation with the qualified individual, because they are going to be required to document all this information as part of their final document to provide to our agencies. And so the qualified individual recommendation can actually consider the new Ffpsa specialized residential facilities certified to care for pregnant and parenting youth who have been or at risk of sex trafficking or commercial exploitation, and our kids who are 18 and over for supervised independent living. So this is a full collected information. After the qualified individual collects all the information, they may make a recommendation for this setting after the fact if the child needs to be met in those particular settings. So if the qualified individual's recommendation is not the placement setting that the parent, family, permanency team, child, or tribe prefer, the QI would need to document those reasons as well. as far as why they're not recommending those preferences. The agency will then be required to document in the out-of-home placement plan updated with the reasons why the qualified individual did not recommend those preferred placements by the parent, family permanency team, child, or tribe. And this next slide here, next slide. This next slide was just to show you, our attendees today, what this Qrtp assessment and recommendation form that the qualified individual will be required to complete. So this is really what it looks like. We're not going to go walk through it because we just talked about everything that's included in there. And as part of the training, they all qualified individuals will walk them through this whole document one by one so they understand what is being asked of them. So this is an electronic document. It is available on eDocs if you want to just go check it out. The number is 8097. So you will receive this document from the qualified individual, include all the CANS tools that will be completed as part of the assessment. And Eric, if you want to just kind of go through the slides, I think there's only 3 of them that show a little bit of the document. Like I said, I'm not going to go through it, but it's about 4 pages that the qualified individual will be required to complete as the final thing that they're doing as part of the assessment. Right. Great. Thank you. As part of this new implementation, effective September 30th, 2021, caseworkers will be required to complete a new Qrtp assessment screen in Ssis. And this is located under the permanency node. And this is to document the Qrtp assessment processes and the qualified individual's recommendation. I'm going to kick it over to Eric now. We're going to walk us over what this new screen looks like and also just its location in Ssis.
Hey again, folks, Eric here. Again, we're just doing a quick high-level overview of the location and some general navigation for this new screen for Qrtp assessment in Ssis. We will go into a more in-depth discussion and in-depth navigation in the follow-up webinar this afternoon at 3:30. So this first slide goes over creating the new Qrtp assessment. You're going to do so under the participants permanency folder, under a new folder for Qrtp assessments, and select new Qrtp assessment. Over here off to the right, you'll see the Qrtp assessment and qualified individual screen. The next slides break this screen into 3 separate pieces so that we can take a more in-depth or closer high-level look of this new screen. So this initial section I like to call the initial Qrtp assessment and qualified individual entry. You'll have several required fields that need to be completed prior to saving this screen. The screen starts with Qrtp assessment and qualified individual help text. Policy was very diligent about providing help text and guidance for Ffpsa related information, and that information is going to be found under that help text link on this page. The first question is, was the juvenile treatment screening team bypassed due to an emotional crisis or other mental health emergency placement? Workers will answer either yes or no. The date recommended for placement in Qrtp by the screening team. Workers will click on the dropdown and select the date. Workers will also enter the date referred to a qualified individual in the corresponding field. And qualified individual completing the assessment can be brought in through a dropdown. This dropdown will contain professional collaterals or collaterals that have been tied to this child participant in current or previous work groups. If the individual cannot be found in this dropdown, they can be added by selecting the action menu and adding a new collateral or professional collateral. And then we want the worker to identify themselves in the following field. The next section of this new screen I like to title the Cultural Competency Qualified Individual Entry in Ssis. The first question, did the parent request a specific culturally competent qualified individual? And then you have yes or no buttons to indicate the answer to that question. If the answer to this question is yes, then the worker can provide or explain the agency's efforts to refer the child to this identified qualified individual. Was the assessment completed by a specific culturally competent qualified individual? Again, individuals can select yes or no. Date qualified individual provided the assessment to the agency. Workers will select a date from the dropdown. And then the Qrtp placement link will appear in this field if that placement has already been entered, or it will be blank if the placement hasn't been entered on the placements, locations, and absence screen. And only Qrtp related placements will appear in this field. Was the family and permanency team membership provided to the qualified individual? Yeah, workers will indicate yes or no. The third and final portion of this new screen is titled, I titled it individually placement preferences and recommendation entry. We will enter the placement preference of the youth. And again, we have blue underlined help text to help us guide us through this portion of the screen. We have the placement preferences of the child and youth's tribe, if applicable. The Qrtp family and permanencies teams placement preferences, as well as the placement recommendation of the qualified individual. In addition, workers are able to attach files to the person, and I'll go over a little bit of that in just a moment here, but we can tie in that qualified individual's assessment and recommendation report to this screen. You can also view the QI assessment and recommendation report if it is brought into this field by selecting the view button. And this screen goes over the attached files under the participant. Just want to make mention that this is attached files under the participant and not under chronology. If you attach the file to chronology, you will not be able to pull it into that qualified individual's assessment and recommendation report on the Qrtp assessment screen. So you want to make sure that you're attaching the file again under the participant's attached files folder. There is a new document type that can be selected in the dropdown once the file has been attached, and that is the qualified individual's assessment and recommendation report selection in the dropdown. Once you have attached that file and named the document type QI assessment and recommendations report, or selected this under the document type, you'll be able to return to the Qrtp assessment screen and click the dropdown and select that attached file, and then you would save the screen. And that is the high-level overview of the Qrtp assessment and QI screen in Ssis. Back to you, Tendai.
Great, thank you, Eric. And I believe you're going to have, like you said, at 3:30, go over this one more time.
That's correct. We have what we call the Ssis Coffee Talk, and I could go ahead and provide links to register for that coffee talk if individuals would like to participate. I can throw that information into the chat right now.
Great, thank you. So a quick note. Ultimately, the goal is to have the qualified individual do all their documenting of the Qrtp assessment on Ssis. And this process has not been developed yet. We're in talks to figure out how we can work that out. Otherwise, before we can get that available, the qualified individual will be completing all required documents just electronically and providing those to the agency as they are completed. The Qrtp assessment is for any placements starting September 30th, which is the implementation date for this. So it's not for kids who are already placed in any residential facilities. It's just kids who are going to go through that process timeline that we talked about earlier, starting September 30th. The statute information for Qrtp assessment is in 260C, starts at 260C 702 to 260C 714. So that all that information kind of goes through all things Qrtp at this point, which will also be detailed in these webinars that are upcoming as well on these dates and times. These are available where you did register for this webinar, so you can go ahead and just register for these as well by going back to that County Link webpage.
Can I share some
Yes.
more information when you're finished? I just want to share where people can find various
Yep.
forms of information.
You can go ahead right now.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, give me 1 second here to get situated. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen for the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy website. This is where individuals are going to find the additional resources about the FFPSA, as well as recorded webinars that we have already done. I do like to allot at least 5 business days to get webinars posted, but as you can see under our webinar recordings, we have the placement process changes, as well as the juvenile treatment screening team process and documentation videos posted thus far. And I'm going to throw that link for you into the chat. And then Tendai, somebody in the chat is asking for those statute numbers, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, yes. Give me a second here. I can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, there it is. Diane, she's on top of it. Okay, and
Great.
then we
Thanks,
have
Di.
we have the FFPSA webinar completion form. If you are an individual that needs to provide documentation to a licensing board or to your supervisor that you've attended a training, you can feel free to fill out this form with your email, your name, and your agency, as well as the session that you attended. We only allow 1 session to be selected per every time you log in, and then you're going to select yes, and then you'll get a return receipt saying, indicating which training and how many hours it was that you attended. So I'm going to also put that in the chat. This is just a quick link to the FFPSA registration from the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy. I'm throwing that in the chat as well. It lists all of the policy webinars as well as the coffee talks. And then finally, we have our County Link site where you can find all things Family First. And I will also throw that information into the web or to the chat. So I just kind of wanted to go over that briefly before we get into the Q&A, because we're getting a lot of questions about where to find information. So there's the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy website under FFPSA. And then we also have our County Link site. And I will turn it back over to our policy partners for the Q&A portion. Thanks for letting me do that.
Thanks, Eric. I just realized I missed to mention that we are going to be having a Qrtp assessment bulletin detailing everything we just talked about today coming out soon here. So we're just in the finalization process of that. So you'll be getting a notification when that bulletin is ready to be viewed. Like I said, it will detail everything we talked about today. I know this is a new process for everyone, and there will be lots of questions, and we would love to answer all of them as much as we can here. But so we'll just continue working together and making sure that everybody's understanding what this new process is before implementation, September 30th, 2021. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, I got to bring the PowerPoint back up. Apologize.
That's okay. So now we can get into our question portion. We're just right at 2:18 here. Our webinar goes on 2:03. So we'll try to answer as many questions as we can here. Otherwise, if we're not able to get through everything, we'll provide a written Q&A, which will be included on the Child Welfare Training Academy under the webinar and the presentation slides as well.
So Tendai, I can jump in here if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So for all of you on the webinar, my role here is to read the questions. So that's what I'm about to do. So we had a number of questions about facilities, and some of those questions are, how many facilities are certified as QRTP in Minnesota? How many are in the process?
Ooh. It's a very good question. Deb, do you want to answer this one?
Yes, I answered it in the chat a little while ago, actually, when people started asking questions about where could they find information about what facilities are QRTPs. And I want to keep everyone in mind that this is a phased-in process. So the application for all the Ffpsa settings became available on July 1. So facilities are right now in the process of making decisions regarding the type of facilities they are going, or the type of certifications that facility or program is going to apply for. We do know that there are about 4 applications for QRTP in the process right now. We also know that some facilities are changing or becoming PRTF. So there's going to be changes in how facilities are being licensed or approved. And with those changes come changes in how placements will occur in those facilities based on either the processes for medical assistance with the PRTFs or with the new process for the QRTPs. Keeping in mind that this process we're talking about today only applies to programs that are certified as QRTPs.
So then, Deb, are all Rule 5 children's facilities and Rule 8 group homes licensed by DOC required to meet the standards of a QRTP?
There is no requirement for a facility to, for a residential facility to meet the requirements of Ffpsa. What I would say is that if your agency is working with a particular facility and you're keeping in mind that these certifications are required for facilities to become approved as Title IV-E approved facilities. So if your agency is working with a facility and you want them to be, you want to be able that your agency to claim federal participation in that placement, please talk with that facility about their plans or encourage them to move forward with those plans so that your agency can be eligible for the federal participation that goes along with Title IV approval.
And then if a facility or a provider does not agree to become certified for a QRTP for youth who are placed in that facility that's not QRTP certified, does the county or the agency have to go through this process? Placement process, QRTP placement process?
The placement process we talked about today, the QRTP process, is only required for QRTP placements. It's not required for the other specialty placements, such as the pregnant and parenting youth. It's not required for the supervised independent living residential facilities for 18 to 21-year-olds. And it's also not required for the the facilities that are going to be certified to either serve children who have been sex trafficked or at risk of sex trafficked.
How about probation placed juveniles? How does all of this QRTP process relate to those placements?
So when agencies have Title IV agreements with their correction departments, agencies then have to follow the Title IV provisions that are required for all children by their agency. So it would apply to those agencies who have Title IV agreements with their corrections.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the assessment process, the assessment tool, I should say. We had some questions about that. While the CANS tool is not a diagnostic tool, the domains in the CANS seem to be duplicative of the requirements in a diagnostic assessment. Can you explain the difference between the CANS and a CASI recommendation for residential treatment that is already completed by the treating mental health professional? Which recommendation holds more weight?
I guess I would say I wouldn't want to say one or the other holds more weight. The CASI is done as part of the diagnostic assessment, and the CANS will be done to determine placement in a QRTP. And those are two different things, and one is in a sense clinical and one is not. We do have Di Marshall with us today, and she can speak a little bit more about the CASI. But the difference of those two is that one is done as part of the diagnostic and the other is done to determine placement in a QRTP, and it is not clinical, and that is for the CANS.
And Tenda, I don't know that I could say that any differently. That's exactly what it is that the mental health professional during the course of the diagnostic will, of course, fill out the CASI, and then it then is fed into the screening meeting. When it's in the screening meeting, that's not saying, hey, you know, we're going to now go automatically with the recommendation to QRTP. It's said with the MHP is that it's going to go to the screening team, and they're going to recommend from there that it goes to the QI. Correct, Deb?
Say that again, only differently.
Only differently. So,
Sorry.
That's okay. I caught you there. The MHP is going to be doing the DA. Part of the DA is the CASI. And so the function is, as Tendai said, it's the clinical function of it. It then goes right to the screening team, where the screening team makes the recommendation for it to go to the QI for a QRTP recommendation. Correct?
Correct. And I would also add that the role of the qualified individual is to determine the least restrictive environment that the needed services could be provided in. So determining if those services could be provided by in-home services in the family or could be provided in a family foster home and not require a placement in a residential facility. So the purpose of this is clearly on the residential placement and not on the needed service, because there are many ways that mental health services and treatment can be offered for children in Minnesota.
And so how long is the QI assessment estimated to take to complete? Is it just the CANS assessment and a meeting with the family child providers?
So the CANS assessment is, it's in a sense a rating tool. So that the qualified individual meets talks and meets with the child, parents, family, and permanency team. After gathering all that information, then they sit down and do the CANS tool, which is completing the ratings on each of these individual domains and the examples that we talked about. earlier. So the CANS tool is really part of the bigger assessment process, because after that, then the qualified individual then completes the QRTP assessment recommendation, documenting everything that has happened, including completion of the CANS and what the recommendation of completing the tool said. And right now, it's from everything that we have talked about with the Parade Foundation, who developed the CANS. It's the assessment process from start to finish. Right now, it's supposed to approximately take between 12 to 18 hours for the qualified individual to complete. But ultimately, we are giving the qualified individual 30 days to complete the assessment, but the sooner the better in completing the assessment. But the timeline for that really is approximately 12 to 18 hours from start to finish, including the CANS and the QRTP assessment recommendation form.
So can we talk a little more about the overall philosophy of requiring a separate QRTP assessment process, in addition to the already established requirements for a residential mental health placement? We know that it traumatizes a family or a child to have to retell their story multiple times. And now we're asking them to tell their story to a QI who is a stranger. How is this in the best interest of children and families that we serve?
Well, the part about then involving a qualified individual to complete, I guess, in a sense, another assessment, is that Ffpsa has required this because we're trying to limit the amount of children going into residential treatment. So introducing the idea of an objective and independent review of that child's needs and strengths, including the family and permanency team, and having this independent individual then determine that is to kind of help the process that only the children who need to be in a residential enter a residential. And the kids, most of our kids may have their needs met in their home or family foster home by being provided community services and resources and stuff like that. So really the basis of all this is the new federal language from Ffpsa requiring there be just another objective independent review of that from somebody who is not involved with the agency. Deb, do you want to add to that a bit?
Kenda, you gave a very good answer. I would only add to that this is a federal law, that this was part of the Family First Prevention Services Act. And the idea is that we restrict or limit the number of children that a Title 40 agency has placement responsibility for, and they are placed in a congregate setting. So remembering that this applies to all settings that aren't family settings, looking at that and making sure that there's an objective opinion about can these services be offered in the family home or in a foster home instead of going to a residential facility. And then working with the family and permanency team as established by the agency to help the family look at the child's needs, consider what has been done, and to offer that assessment then to the court. And the court ultimately reviews the assessment and approves or disapproves of the QRTP placement.
Will there be increased restrictions on reasons that a QRTP provider can discharge difficult children or things that they have to do prior to discharge? The reason counties have kids moving from place to place is often due to providers not willing to be or able to provide the services that they're licensed to provide. Will the QRTP certification process, will this be added as a requirement?
So I can attempt to address that question, but I think what I want to say is you're bringing up a very good question. And that's part of the challenges that we've had right now in Minnesota in relationship to children who need residential placement. And I guess one of the things I would say is after implementation, I look forward to looking at the children who move from place to place and how we can support getting their needs in those facilities met, as well as children who can maintain in their family homes or in family foster homes. I think it's very important to note that some of our children have very high needs, and that we need to look at how those needs are being met so that they're not moving around incredibly or often. And I think I take your question very seriously, and I thank you for that observation. And I look forward to working on that more with county and tribal partners, as well as our facilities.
Another question then is, what happens if a foster home is recommended, but one can't be found, or the foster home does not want to accept the youth? Basically, a foster home cannot be found for this youth. What happens then?
I also want to just remind folks that these new requirements apply to placements that are made September 30th and on. They do not apply to any children who are currently in any setting in the state of Minnesota. It applies to children who move or who enter care September 30th or on. So we're going to have legacy placements that are going to continue. With that being said, we do have a need to recruit family foster homes. We do have a need to provide services to our relatives who are accepting children as family foster care, to be sure that we're providing all the services in those homes that are that could maintain the child in that home. And that is that's going to be our challenge in the next year, to recruit more homes and to assess the supports necessary to keep children with relatives when relatives are available to take the kids. So I don't have an answer for that, other than we need to recruit and retain our foster homes.
So let's move on. Let's move on to talking about the QIs themselves. So there'll be a list of QIs that counties will utilize to perform the assessment. Is that correct?
Say that again, Paul. My audio cut out, I'm sorry.
Oh, there will be a list of QIs that counties can utilize to perform the assessment, correct?
The state, we will provide a list of all the individuals, all qualified individuals who have completed the training, keeping in mind that the training is required for both the qualified individuals that are established by counties and tribes, and the individuals that the state recruits as well.
So is it possible for an employee of a particular county that is looking to place the child? Oh, I'm sorry. Can an employee of a particular county do a QI assessment for a different county?
As I said, a federal waiver is required for any employee of a agency, and that would be your county or tribal agencies, your Title IV agencies, to be qualified individuals. We have, as part of our Title IV plan, we are submitting that, and we are going to be requesting a waiver for county individuals, for county employees to be qualified individuals under certain requirements. If that waiver is approved, we will provide information about that. But at this point in time, we do not have approved waiver, so agency employees cannot be qualified individuals.
Can the tribe decline to designate a QI? And if that happens, then the county would be the one to designate the QI?
We are going to be reaching out to tribes, community agencies, and others to develop a list of culturally competent or culturally appropriate qualified individuals that counties and tribes can use. So we hope to be having that as being the department's goal in providing a rich, culturally diverse group of qualified individuals that families could select from, or that tribes could select from.
What happens if if an agency needs to make a placement into a QRTP in early October and there's no availability of a QI?
The first training of the qualified individuals will be provided in September. I encourage our county agencies to start to also recruit or look for individuals who you feel would be good qualified individuals to serve your local area. And we will work with the academy to provide as many trainings as possible this fall to have everyone be trained and on the list.
How will people know about the dates of the QI training and when it's scheduled? I guess that's.
So many of you are already receiving our Gov delivery emails that we've been sending out regularly here come August. We will be providing more information about the dates of that training once they're set in September. That will be posted on our County Link webpage with registration when it's available. And we will be providing more information about when that becomes available on the Gov delivery emails. If you're receiving those, you will see that right away.
And then who pays for the QI's time and the administration of the tool?
So it will be a combination of counties and tribes, as well as the state will also be providing payment to those that the state has a contract with. I see that we are at 2:38. Are we continuing to 3 o'clock?
I'll ask Tendai. I thought that was the time we were scheduled for.
Okay, thank you. I was just clarifying.
Well, I should clarify with Tendai. Is that correct?
Yes, we still have many more questions to go through.
That's perfect. I just wanted to double check to make sure the time we were within our time allotment. So thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. The question was.
Sorry.
No, it's my. When are we supposed to fill out this form and how often is it supposed to be completed? I believe that was the referral for a QI.
That will be done when the juvenile treatment screening team recommends a child to be placed in a QRTP. So that referral for the assessment needs to happen per statute right away.
And then it was mentioned, but let's say it one more time. Foster homes, do they need to become a QRTP?
No, not family foster homes.
Thank you. Again, talking more about payment, where will counties be able to find QIs, particularly clinicians, who will accept the rate of $30 an hour, typically 12 hours in length, to complete the assessments? We have a difficult time getting DAs from clinicians, so I do not see anyone accepting these rates to complete them.
So I can reply to that one, Tendai. The rate that the state has determined to pay qualified individuals is based on the rate that the state pays for the min-choice assessors. It does not need to be the rate that the counties choose to pay their qualified individuals, but we share that information. We also, in consulting with our min-choices policy people, I've learned that it takes about 12 to 18 hours to complete a min-choice assessment. So we are thinking that this is similar process as the min-choice's responsibility. So therefore, we selected that as being the average time that it would take a qualified individual to complete this assessment.
Can you clarify, will the CANs completed by the QI override the clinical recommendation? Does the QI have the final say?
the QI is going to have, yes, in a sense, the QI is going to have the final say, because this is supposed to be an objective and independent assessment that is required federally at this point. So the qualified individual's recommendation will be the final say. Now, with that recommendation is going to go to the courts and they get to approve or disapprove. But for the purpose of doing the assessment and making a recommendation, the qualified individual will have that final say.
I would just add that the qualified individual is not determining if it's if there's a medical necessity for mental health treatment. The qualified individual is determining the least restrictive environment for that treatment defined to be provided. It is not a medical necessity determination the qualified individual is making. So when they're making their assessment, they're looking at the services that would be available in the home or in a foster home to meet the child's current needs. I would also add that the court reviews the qualified individual's determination. So ultimately the court will approve or disapprove of the QRTP placement.
Is it a requirement that counties develop their own QI program, or can they just instead use the state list and not have their own program?
There is not a requirement for a county to have their own qualified individual program. However, it is required as a Title IV agency for a child to be placed in a QRTP that a qualified individual complete that assessment.
This question is in regards to the SSIS format. And I think it was when Eric was speaking that he spoke about a QRTP referral, but it looked like that would autofill if the youth was in a placement already. And the question is, I thought the referral was made prior to the youth being placed.
I believe that there are circumstances where youth have to be placed right away and circumvent the process. So the agency could potentially enter that placement prior to following the requirements of the family and permanency team, as well as the QI. So that's why that placement was appearing in that document. I should have been careful and clarified that.
And thank you, Eric. That was good clarification. And that's definitely to what you just said, that they may be moments where a child is placed in the QRTP before the assessment process has started due to a mental health crisis. And if that child it's determined by the agency that they need continued services in that type of setting, then the qualified individual assessment process then needs to start for that child while they're in that placement.
So another question. So during this 30 days that the QI has to complete their assessment, are the costs of that placement Title IV-E reimbursable?
Deb, do you want to tackle that one?
So are the costs of the qualified individual assessment Title IV-E reimbursable? That's the question.
No. So the child has been placed and the qualified individual has 30 days to do the assessment. So the child is in placement for 30 days before the assessment is completed. Is that 30 days of placement Title IV-E reimbursable?
Yes. If the child has been placed in a qualified individual, if the child has been placed in a QRTP, those first 30 days can be Title IV-E reimbursable if the facility is approved as a QRTP.
So then what happens is if one of the elements of the assessment, the juvenile screening team or the qualified individual assessment or the recommendation is not completed within 30 days of placement.
If the qualified individual does not complete the assessment within 30 days, that would impact the Title 40 eligibility of that placement. And I'll just add on, I also saw questions about if the qualified individual's report when the qualified individual's report goes to court and the court does not agree with that qualified individual's report, then the court order is the determination of the least restrictive setting.
Who can supervise the in-person interview between a QI and the child? Just a case manager? Can other individuals supervise that contact?
The agency caseworker for sure can assume that role. But if it works well, that maybe the parent can supervise, or if the child is in a family foster home and is being considered for QRTP placement and removed from the family foster home, they can also supervise, but just somebody who is going to make sure that the safety and well-being of that child is taken care of in that moment. So right now, I mean, however it can be worked out by the agency. So.
Will the QI be responsible for requesting documents like an IEP or DA that they wish to review? It's our agency's practice that we do not release outside providers' documents that we've collected.
This is the part where I think we would go back to, agency responsibilities and just making sure that you're communicating and consulting, and however those releases need to be signed would need to be figured out by the agency in that moment. So however, whatever the agency can do to assist the qualified individual in that moment is what they should do.
And how is the QRTP process? No, I guess, sorry.
Can I add one more piece to that question?
Yes.
I would also suggest consultation with your county attorney regarding sharing information with a qualified individual as required by the statutes, and have that consultation based on the individual case.
How is this going to work for 260D cases when you don't have to have the court approve the placement until day 165?
This changes 260D placements, and you will note when the legislative bulletin comes out shortly that there is changes to 260D in relationship to Ffpsa requirements. And they will need to go to court and have the QRTP assessment reviewed by the court at that 60-day placement timeframe.
Screening is required for any placement request when public funds will be used. Your direction, I think that's DHS's, direction on when a screening is required is different. Does this mean that all placement requests that are paid by MA or PMAP is required to enter a QRTP? Hence, the screening is required?
So this is Deb. That is a discussion that should occur at the juvenile treatment screening team. To what level of care the agency is making that recommendation to, and the steps necessary for that level of care, taking in consideration the level of care determination that was done as part of the diagnostic, and also the concerns and child's needs that articulated during the juvenile treatment screening team.
And since the QI cannot be a social service agency staff person, how is it that they can enter information into SSIS?
This is the process I mentioned just as an FYI, and this is not going to happen anytime soon because it's actually a very long process to get all the documents that will be required for the qualified individuals to complete as part of the Qrtp assessment. And they will only have the function of completing those documents for that assessment. They would not have access to anything else. That is what we're striving for, is we're developing this, is we're going to start developing it in the SSI system. But like I said, this is not, this is future work that we are starting to look into and work so that it's a seamless process in our agency workers looking at the information, because it will already be in SSIS. But like I said, the goal is for the qualified individual at that time, when they're able to do this process in SSIS, to only have access to enter the Qrtp assessment under that child, and they won't have any access to anything else.
So I'm just going to place this little caveat on my next question. I'm kind of outside my area, so these acronyms I do not know. Can MA or PMAP funded placements go into a PRTF facility?
This is Deb. So yes, Di, please, can you respond to that question?
Yes. I think we'd need more information. For instance, if a parent places a child into a PRTF, they might do it with a PMAP and we would never know. Now, if, and actually, yeah, if they're going through the county, then if it was county worker that made the placement, yes, it would go through SSIS.
Has an analysis been done on the increased per diem cost to become a QRTP in order to claim the Title IV reimbursements?
So the rates for residential treatment are determined by a lead county contract. So I would just say that there has not been any analysis by the state done in relationship to the rates that have been determined through a lead county contract to this point. I will just add on one other piece to what Di said, and I'm hoping this isn't confusing, but if the county has placement responsibility and there's a determination by the medical, through medical necessity, that the child should go into a PRTF, that would be a determination outside of what the county does, but rather that would be entered into SSIS as a hospitalization, but not a placement in a residential facility. So I hope that helps clarify that question. Does that sound right, Di?
It does, and I'm actually glad you said that because I'm going to confuse it just a little bit more. You all know that then probably that when a child is on a PMAP, is a member of a PMAP, that still needs to go through, and not a PRTF, it needs to go through a residential treatment center or a QRTP, that still needs to go through the screening process. So I like that Deb has made that dichotomy. You just look at them two differently. One is like a hospitalization or a service, and then the other's a placement. So thank you, Deb, for doing that.
One more question and then we'll wrap it up. Will there be quotas or limits to how many children in actual numbers or percentages can be placed in QRTPs?
This is Deb, and I'm not sure if it's a quota or a limit, but there is a number of beds that will be available in facilities, and we cannot exceed that number of beds in a QRTP program. So that would be, to me, the requirement or the licensing limitations. In wrapping this up, I want to add one thing. I just want to note some of the discussion we just had about the different types of facilities. I want to remind folks that later this month, we're going to have a training about the changes that are going to happen regarding entering continuous placements. And that is the changes in relationship to AFGARs. And I want to encourage everyone to attend that training so you can kind of hear some of the changes that are occurring when you're entering a new continuous placement or moving a child from one place to another in a continuous placement, and how AFGAR's rule has changed, some of that in relationship to Ffpsa, and some of that is not in relationship to Ffpsa. It's just federal AFGAR rule changes. So I want to encourage folks to attend that, as well as to note that next week, we are going to be doing a training on the out-of-home placement plan and the changes that have been made to meet the requirements of Ffpsa. So I want to just get everyone thinking about that as well.
Thank you. And I will turn it back over to Tendai or Ashley to close us out.
All right. Eric, you can go to the next slide. All right. I know we answered quite a few questions here. I'm not sure if there was more questions left, but if there were any that we did not get through today, we're going to get a copy of those and be able to provide written questions to you. So this will be included underneath the recording of the video webinar with the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy. So those questions we didn't answer today, we'll be able to provide those responses then. But thank you everyone for joining us today. Is our email here if you have any further questions moving forward. And like we have talked about today, this process of the Qrtp assessment, the qualified individual, Ffpsa requirements, all of this is new. And we know that they will be questions, and we'll be here to answer them as we move forward here to implementation date, which is September 30th, 2021. So thank you, everyone.